It burns. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I think you're all trickling in. Take a seat if you can. I hope you enjoyed afternoon tea and are feeling refreshed and ready for our final sessions of the day. Our next session is sponsored by major sponsor Wood Solutions. And before we commence, we're going to have a short video featuring Howard Parry-Husband, CEO at Pollinate. On behalf of Wood Solutions, Howard discusses the relationship between design and construction trends and the changing face of Australian communities. Take it away, Wood Solutions.
The changing face of Australian communities is fundamentally changing the design and construction sector. We've got the increase in population, increased heat stress, more people and frankly less space. And this is driving a desire for authenticity and effectively a reconnection. The design and construction sector has responded with a desire for more natural materials, especially wood in the built environment, and less concrete and steel, both for its health and well-being benefits as well as its aesthetic benefits, but also a recognition that we need to design spaces that enable people to come together, really look for the value of social interactions as opposed to just, if you like, wealth creation. This approach is really the Airbnb or Uber approach to utility in the built environment.
Well, thank you very much, Howard and Wood Solutions. Please give them a round of applause for their generous sponsorship. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our next session, Mind Over Matter, Managing the Industry's Mental Health. Please welcome to the stage our moderator, the indefatigable, the unashamedly magnificent Romilly Magew, Chief Executive Officer, Green Building Council of Australia.
Oh, I'm really short, sorry. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming back after the afternoon session. I thought we might lose some of you. As I'm about to get up on stage and have a couch session with Lucy Brogden, I thought I'd give you statistics on the number of female speakers this year. It's currently sitting at 42% female, 58% male. It was actually higher, but we've had a number of changes, a few late changes. So I think it's still great that we got over 40% female speakers this year, and we need to make sure that it's 50% every year like it was last year. But you can tweet that, so 42% female and 58% male. And for those women who haven't put their name forward in the past for Green Cities or any of the Property Council and Green Building Council committees or sessions, and we have them, please lean in. I'm going to be delighted to introduce Lucy Brogden in a minute to have a conversation on the couch with Australia's National Mental Health Commissioner, Lucy Brogden, as we analyse the secrets to building mentally healthy workplaces. What's special about this, and Kath McDermott gave me a key point, is you've got to remember there's other people in the room, Rom. This isn't about you and Lucy having a chat like you normally do. The reason being is Lucy is my Northern Beaches sister. She's a Bilgola surf lifesaver with me, and we used to actually row in a surf boat. And yes, there's some hysterical stories about Lucy and I doing that. I was in the front, she was in the back, and she had problems jumping in the boat sometimes. She and I are also silver shoes buddies. Between the two of us, we think we have 20 pairs. And so whenever we travel anywhere, we Instagram and take photos of silver shoes. So moving on to an incredibly important issue, being mental health. Tomorrow, Frankie from Property Council will be releasing a common language for social sustainability, and in there mental health is covered a number of times, including how Green Star is caring for construction workers in mental health, and we picked that up in innovation. The statistics around mental health certainly are serious. Around 1 million Australian adults are currently living with depression, and over 2 million with anxiety, which Beyond Blue says has a significant impact on Australian businesses, not to mention their families and communities. 1 in 5 employees in Australia is likely to be working with a mental health condition. Despite 91% of employees believing workplace mental health is important, Beyond Blue has found that only half think their workplace is mentally healthy. So today we're going to look at how our industry can build mentally healthy workplaces. It is my absolute thrill and pleasure to introduce Lucy Brogden. She's passionate about mental health and has more than a decade's experience in organisational psychology. She has also spent the past 25 years working with corporations including Macquarie Bank, Ernst & Young, which gives her a unique insights into workplace culture and how they can help or harm mental health. So please join with me in welcoming my beautiful friend, Lucy Brogden. She's got silver shoes on. So, Luce, I think a great way to start is, and I know we're going to reflect on a number of panel sessions today, because every time someone got up and spoke to something, she goes, "Oh, ask me a question about that." No, ask me a question about that. So I've had to rewrite all my questions. So, thanks, Luce. Yep. So please paint for me a picture of mental illness in Australia and how important it is for both government, workplaces and the community.
Sure, Rom, thanks. And thank you for having me and putting this topic on the agenda. In starting, I want to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners where we're gathering today, and particularly acknowledge the powerful understanding that our First Nations people bring to social and emotional wellbeing. Really, from them, we have so much to understand on this topic and we can learn so much. And I just want to highlight that while we have no closing the gap metrics for mental health, which is a real issue in itself, one of the statistics that I want to share quite publicly is our national suicide rate sits at 13 per 100,000, and we know that it's a huge issue in the construction sector. But for some of our communities, that rate goes as high as 74 per 100,000. So while there's no formal measure, we've got a really informal measure that we have a lot to do as a nation and as a country, and so much of that comes down to the work in workplaces in terms of what we can achieve. You've outlined in the introduction some of the high-level numbers around mood disorder and anxiety. Unfortunately, we know those numbers impact more women than men, although we think that part of that distribution is related to men or women being better at help seeking than men. Sadly, our suicide rate is higher for men than it is for women, but we are seeing that more women attempt suicide and actually more women are starting to complete, and that is a gap that's closing that we're not happy about. But if we look at mental health as an issue for our society and we can start at the bottom or the top, but if we start at the top, the impact of, according to the OECD data and other similar sources, mental illness is costing Australia roughly 4% of GDP annually. That's $70 billion. And listening to some of the earlier presentations, what we actually know, and particularly Tim's presentation around the debates we're having on super reform, tax reform, etc., is that it's only really an relatively insignificant improvement in mental illness will see significant GDP impacts. And so when I talk to people about what we're doing around mental illness, our big levers sit in finance and treasury, employment, education and housing, and health comes to the end. In terms of the workplace issues that we see in mental illness, most of us will be impacted by what we call mild to moderate mood disorders, anxiety, depression, etc., mild end of spectrum bipolar. Very few of us are going to be interacting at the significant end, where we've got about 100,000 Australians at any given year with severe psychosocial disability. So for most workplaces, it's actually designing a safe workplace to keep the well, and then accommodate those with mild to moderate illness to take time out for their recovery journey and come back and forth.
So I want to follow that up with when Jackie was speaking in the last session, and I thought it was really interesting about mental health and working indoors and the health of workers. How important is it around some of the things and themes she talked about?
I found Jackie's presentation really fascinating. One of the things that we know in terms of workplace mental health is there's nothing new. And I have a hashtag that I put out when I talk about this is beyond yoga and fruit bowls. And the positive to that is that good work is actually good for you. And the literature in this space is over 100 years old, and it kind of intrigues me when workplaces say, oh, we do the engagement survey, we've got yoga, we have an EAP. Well, quite frankly, that's ticket to the dance kind of stuff. That's the real basics of getting this stuff right. This comes to good job and work design of the task itself, but the environment in which people are working. And what Jackie was talking about is really powerful. You know, Hertzberg, who's a great thought leader in this space, 50 years ago identified that actually giving people, say, a pay rise, the lift that they will get from that pay rise lasts about 3 months. Their work environment and the positives that come from that are everlasting. So it often intrigues me when I go into a workplace and people go, oh, look, we're paying them more, we've just given another round of pay rises, they're still not happy. And it's like, well, look at the literature. And if you look to the literature, you'd see that there's not going to be that lasting impact. Yet on the other side, often when we get to cost cutting, what's the first thing to go out of the workplace? The plants. And it's often a big fanfare about we're saving money, we're removing the plants, or it's done in secret overnight and you come in and they're all gone. If you look to Jackie's research, you'll know that you're much better investing in the pot plants than you are in just forever throwing money at people.
The other session that you and I were having a talk about was Tim Gartrell touched on social media. And so I'd be interested in two things. One, in the use of social media in demystifying the myths of mental health, but then on the other side, the challenges of social media around bullying and how that's had an impact.
Sure. So there's been a huge spotlight on cyberbullying, and which is warranted because it is a significant issue that we're seeing, particularly for our young people, but we see this happening in workplaces and in communities across the age spectrum. So that is certainly a challenge, but we also see the plus side to social media providing a great support to people that can't get out into community, and particularly in terms of peer support. There's great information out there, but peers with lived experience are able to support each other through difficult times, and it's really about getting that balance right. We work with Facebook, Twitter and others to try and develop responsible practices. We're working with Mindframe around guidelines, around what is responsible. But some of these are bigger philosophical conversations that Tim was touching on that we see in society around what is in the community interest, what is in the public interest. And, you know, stepping back to mainstream media, we still have an ongoing debate with some elements of mainstream media around whether it's right to publish means of suicide. You will never convince me that there is anyone in the public who finds it in their interest to know how someone died by suicide. Yet this is a debate we have with editors even as recently as last week.
Another session we were thinking about was the build to rent session and around housing. What are some of the initiatives around housing and how's that impact mental health?
Well, I think it's really interesting when people ask what the work of the National Mental Health Commission is and what's our number one project and piece of work. Well, we come to anything to do with mental health with a housing first philosophy. So our biggest piece of work at the moment is actually a long-term partnership with Ahuri and others looking at issues to do with housing and accommodation. We know that for people with particularly severe psychosocial disability, but even further up the spectrum into mild to moderate, housing is the number one issue for them. They won't be able to participate in good care and good recovery if they don't have a safe place to live. And so it's a real challenge for us. We work also with the NDIA. They've estimated that they need about 128,000 units of accommodation for the population that they're supporting. We have a similar need, and so it's actually quite exciting to see some of these build-to-rent concepts coming in the affordable spectrum and what might be actually adaptable further down to social housing. The thing I'd say with a lot of our potential tenants is they bring the rent with them, and they're actually really good, reliable tenants. And so how we can work creatively with the sector to develop some of those opportunities is really exciting.
There's no questions coming up, so any questions from the floor, please put your hand up. Moving back to thinking about the workplace, for some, if we're looking at the statistics, some of you in the room don't feel that you work in mentally healthy workplaces. What are some initiatives that either HR or architects or engineers or anyone can think about, some really initiatives that they can take into consideration in creating a mentally healthy workplace?
So for me, as you know, what I don't think goes into a mentally healthy workplace, I think, you know, the yoga and fruit bowls is nice to have. Tony LaMontagne down here at Deakin has done a lot of work in this area, and his primary mantra is that you have to reduce the negative before you can bring in the positive. And so for us, the key starting point is in good job and work design. As I said, that's got an environmental component, but it's actually sitting down and, look, thinking about your own role. How many of you have a position description, a job description? And if you've got it, how much of that PD actually relates to the job that you do? And most people say, oh yeah, that's that really interesting piece of paper written 6 years ago. These are really powerful tools in creating a mentally healthy workplace. It's taking the time to understand the psychological demands of the role, the physical demands of the role, the variability of the role, the autonomy that you have in the role, and how you can address that for the individual and the team. And when we start to tackle these things, which don't require expensive consultants, they take conversations with HR, with team members to do that well, we start to see the improvement in wellbeing in the workplace. It's looking at reasonable work adjustments for those people that are transitioning in and out of work due to illness, supporting their recovery journey. Because unlike a physical illness, often the best thing for someone with a mood disorder is to stay engaged in work, but the right kind of work. And that's not always easy, but it's not impossible either.
So for other people in the room, if they are concerned about a colleague, and obviously, they're not sure what to do or whether to say something to the colleague, what advice would you give them in dealing with if they're concerned for a colleague's mental health?
Absolutely. Bring your humanity to work every day. The greatest gift that you can give someone struggling with mental illness, particularly a work colleague, is to hold up the mirror for them. What we know in terms of a mood disorder is that the first thing that often goes for those people is their own self-awareness. So while you might be having that conversation with other colleagues going, can't they see that they're not performing as well? Don't they notice they've worn the same clothes to work? Can't they see that sleeping under the desk is not the right thing to do? Well, actually, no, they can't. And so it is a very generous thing to be able to say to a colleague, I notice that you're not performing at the same level. I notice that you're taking longer at lunch. I notice that you're coming in later. I imagine there might be something going on for you. I'm feeling quite helpless, but I'm here to help. And honestly, I think that is the greatest gift that you could give to a colleague, is to ask them, offer a hand of help. You don't have to be the source of help for them. Just be the person that helps them step onto that journey. There's no privacy that you need to worry about. It's just what we do in a place of humanity, and it can be so important to getting that journey started. When my husband was unwell, he ended up hospitalised after a suicide attempt, and he said to me one day when I went to visit him, there's this thing called self-awareness. And I said, sure do. And he went, haven't got any. And he was exactly right. And I said, this is why you are here. So don't assume that someone that is struggling actually knows and is aware that they're struggling and can put their finger on it. I say to people, often they'll say, so-and-so used to be such a good performer, and now we have to performance manage them. If your sentence starts with they used to be such a good performer, stop there and find out what's going on for that person. People don't go from being a good performer to a bad performer for no reason. If you hired a bad performer, then you need to look at your hiring practice. But if you've got a long-standing employee whose practice has changed or behaviour's changing, find out what's going on for them.
So there's a great question, I'll come back to you, Jeff, I really will. But there is a great question that follows on from exactly what we were just talking about. And it says, regardless of how supportive your organisation is, it can still be really daunting to tell your employer you need mental health support or time off. What is your suggestion to employees who are reluctant to seek help?
Absolutely, and I've got to sadly say that when people ask me about disclosure at work, I still err on the side of saying don't disclose. There are very few workplaces in Australia or teams where I think they've got the level of sophistication to manage disclosure. Sometimes you have to disclose. We have, through the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance that I chair, Beyond Blue hosts for us a website called Heads Up. It's got some great tools for employers and individuals around this actual issue of disclosure. It's interesting when I talk to the CEO level and executive levels, sometimes they'll say to me, we have no mental illness in our organisation. As you can see, I should never play poker because I can't hide the look of disdain that comes on my face. But to me, if you think you've got no mental illness in your organisation, that's a real indicator of the culture of your organisation, that people do not feel safe to disclose. And I think that can be a really good barometer that you can create a safe culture where people can speak to their team leader and manager and say, this is what I'm struggling with, this is the support I will need from you to be part of my recovery journey.
Jeff. And there's one up the back. You can go first, Jeff. Yell.
around the physical design of buildings that will actually help support better mental health?
Look, it's a really good question, Jeff, and I think, and I would point you to the work that people like Jackie are doing. There's a whole field in psychology emerging. It's got an interest group level within the APS around organisational design from a psychological perspective. A lot of it, as I said, this is quite old stuff. You know, Elton Mayo, who was an Australian polymath, 100 years ago was working at Harvard and did the Hawthorne studies. Now, some of that was kind of trite stuff and they didn't have the data behind the hypotheses that they produced from that. But, you know, things that we've known about ambient temperature, light, workspace, need for personalised space, none of this is new. This is 100 years old, and yet we keep kind of trying to find the silver bullet solutions around it. So, you know, Jackie, the work that you spoke to, it was so exciting for me to hear that, and that we are building the compelling evidence base for managers to inform themselves in. The other thing, Romilly and I have views on hot desking, but I say to people, look at the literature around hot desking. If you are doing it for financial reasons, make that informed choice. But look at the literature around the impacts on employee wellbeing and make an informed choice when you do it. There are positive ways to do hot desking, but there's some very detrimental ways to doing things like hot desking and active workspace. And you need to get it right for your workspace, your work patterns. One size doesn't fit all.
There's a question up the back.
Thanks, Rom. It's Anne Austin from Lendlease. Lucy, I'm interested in whether you have come across any connection with excessive hours of work and mental health issues. There's an exciting momentum building in our industry around this topic. A number of competitors have come together through industry bodies, through the ACA, through groups with Victorian and New South Wales government as well for CILF, realising we've got a massive cultural issue in the property sector. It's a very unattractive place to work for number of reasons, but aggressive, long hours, totally inflexible, and we have this massive skill shortage kind of staring at us. And so we're all coming together to go, hey, it's time to rethink our culture, it's time to re-educate people about neurology and how the human body works, etc. And if there was anything that you had come across that has a definite link between mental health and excessive hours, it would be enormously helpful, because of course our industry has a shocking mental health record as well, and we suspect there's a connection.
Yep. Thanks, Anne. Look, when I say to people, when they say, where do you start at job and work design? I'd say you start at 8 hours sleep. And you need to design a role that allows your employees 6 to 8 hours of good sleep. And that's, you know, that's not about work-life balance, that's job and work design. And if you're creating roles where that's just not possible, that's not good practice. I'm not sure what the week is this week, but sleep and work is a theme at the moment, World Sleep Week or whatever it might be. I would point you to all of you, Business in the Community, which is one of the Prince's Trusts in the UK, produces fantastic resources around mental health at work, and they've actually got good sleep and fatigue management protocols, interventions and strategies that they've just put out not so long ago. So Business in the Community is a great starting point for resources there. But fatigue, lack of sleep is the driver behind so much to do with mood disorder. And I think, it's going to be the real public health strategy of the next 10 years. We're seeing it coming through more and more. But please, if you're doing job and work design, think about making sure that the jobs you design allow for 8 hours sleep. You know, it's interesting. You think about if you're going in to have brain surgery, how many hours of sleep would you like the brain surgeon to have? You'd kind of want them to have a lot of sleep, right? So at what point does a role vary that you don't want to engage someone that's at the peak of their physical and mental capacity? And yet somehow we kind of think it's acceptable to have people servicing us, that are putting in mega days, mega hours. Yet there's certain standards we have, but we need to apply those across the board. Safety and well-being applies to every role, not just certain roles.
There's a question, what's the duty of care that we have?
You have many duties of care in this space. So, workplace health and safety legislation requires that we all provide a workplace free of psychological harm. You have to provide, and in this sector, you guys are well aware of your responsibilities around physical safety. The same relies on psychological safety, and the Green Star rating around that is so important. But you've got carers' responsibilities, fair work responsibilities, discrimination responsibilities. So there's a lot out there that needs to be understood and applied.
Is there one final question? Yep, where am I looking? Over there? Simon, just yell.
Hey Rom, over to your left. Simon Carter from Morphosis. Look, we are digitalising fast.
And be quick, because I've got 1 minute.
Okay, the ways in which we live and work. Jobs will be automated. Some segments of our workforce will struggle with that. We'll work in digitalised virtual environments more and more. So what do you think are the implications of digitalisation to mental well-being?
Look, I think it's a really important area, and it almost stems from a philosophical discussion. And given that we've got a short amount of time, I'd point you to Matthew Taylor's paper from the Royal Academy that came out in the UK middle of last year on the gig economy, because I think it underpins a lot of the work the issues that we're doing. But for me, we have a moral obligation, irrespective of how we employ or engage people, to provide them in a safe work environment. I struggle with some of the disruptor models at the moment in terms of what that means for the people engaged in those processes. And I think that the future of work needs to really consider these issues from a well-being perspective as well as an economic perspective.
Oh my God, she finished right on 0-0. I knew Lucy would be fabulous. I'm completely biased. I can't help it. We go walking. Our mental health is we go walking regularly with another girlfriend. So we didn't even touch on exercise, but we'll do that next year. So thank you very much. Please join with me in thanking Lucy Brogden. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was great. And so, ladies and gentlemen, what can we take from that? Well, I mean, look out for your teammates, for sure. Seek the online resources that Lucy referred to if you have any questions. And obviously, take that time to be compassionate and to be thoughtful in the workplace. It's clearly part of what we've discussed today. I'd like you to give one more round of applause to our impressive Silver Shoe double act, Lucy Brogden and Romilly Magew. And in doing that, say thanks to our major sponsors, Wood Solutions, who very generously sponsored that session. Our next and final session for the day, before the wrap-up, is sure to leave you with a fresh lens on landscaping, as the rise of urban greening presents a new opportunity to recast the relationship between people and the environment. And we've touched on that a little bit already today. And to delve deeper into this topic, I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker. He's a qualified horticulturalist and multi-award-winning international landscape designer, founder and director of the design firm, and this is a bit of a giveaway here, Dury Design. I've really buried that lead, haven't I, so successfully. He is also the author of 9 best-selling books such as 100 Gardens, Outdoor Kids, as well as the Outdoor Room and Patio Garden Design and Inspiration. As one of Australia's most recognisable talents, he's featured in over 30 television shows worldwide. In Australia, he's hosted many top-rating programs, including The Outdoor Room, Australia's Best Backyards, The Block, Top Design, as well as Backyard Blitz, for which he received the Logie Award for Most Popular Male Talent, as well as 6 consecutive Logies for Most Popular Lifestyle Program. In addition to television and media appearances, he also designs a range of outdoor furniture and garden care products through his company Patio by Jamie Dury, as well as a range of paints, rugs and even an iPhone app. An advocate for conserving our natural surroundings, he's passionately involved with the environment and charity work. He's got 9 abs just like Lego Batman. Please give a warm welcome to Jamie Dury.
Thank you. Hello everyone, how are you? Wow, this is much taller than I ordered. I ordered the smallest lectern they could possibly find. I am standing up behind here, for those of you who are wondering. I will start out by saying I'm very, very privileged to be here. This is, I think, one of the best brains trusts I've ever seen, and it's really been tremendous and a true honour to sit amongst all of you and hear some of you talk. I'm going to share with you a little bit of my story and I guess my take on, or our take I should say, on sustainable landscaping and actually the green evolution. We've been in this space now. We celebrated our 20th birthday in the design industry this February, and it didn't always start where it is right now. In fact, we started many years ago in studying horticulture and landscape design, and then moved into, these days we do a lot of sustainable furniture design, which I'll share with you again. But all of it has been based off nature, and I'll delve into the deep, deep world of biomimicry as well as we move forward. But it's really been quite a pleasure to see where architecture and garden has come to today, because I think 20 years ago when we were first working on commercial developers, the landscape architect would be over here, the architect would be over here, the architect would come up with the plan, of course, and then we would end up with the skerricks that are left over, and we're having to, greenify whatever's left over on the floor plan. These days, I'm very proud to say there's a much more collaborative approach, and we're getting much better buildings for it, and a much more effective result, not just for our communities and the people that live in these places and cohabitate, but most importantly for our planet as well. So the Green Revolution started, I think, about 15 years ago. And you can see that in most of the facade images here, we're talking about greening rooftops, we're talking about greening walls, we're talking about bringing vegetable gardens into commercial real estate, into urban areas, because if you think about it, gardens really do have a lovely way of gluing people together. We just heard these wonderful comments about mental health. In my opinion, plants really do provide a sense of well-being, and that is, children study better when they're connected to plants. Crime has been reduced in places like China and New York by up to 38% just by adding gardens into urban areas. And there's plenty of these sorts of programs going on. So it's not just about the food that's produced and creating those urban food bowls within the communities, but it's about the community resource and the way that people are connecting with each other over these lovely fruits and vegetables that are being produced chemical-free. We're controlling the food that goes into our children's mouths, and we're actually producing higher quality fruit and vegetables, not so perfect, but much higher in nutrients, and placing less impact on the agricultural industry. We're also looking at rooftop gardens. We've now got much better technology in outdoor furniture. We've got antimicrobial fabrics now that don't get mold on them. We've got beautiful pots and statues and fountains that actually start to work in. And we're also starting to think about using more vertical plants rather than lateral plants to make way for outdoor living, which is very important to a lot of residential inner city buildings. The urban heat island effect is something that's very much taking off in New York, and it's been doing that for several years now. And this is really just about cooling down those heat islands by greenifying the rooftops, and even in some cases painting them white to reflect off some of the heat that comes into cities. And people like Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro are involved, are spearheading some of those movements in New York. Balcony gardening's also become very, very big. And these days now, developers are thinking more and more about how can we provide more space? How can we provide that fifth room where we actually get to spend breakfasts and maybe dinners out on the balcony in fresh air and sunshine, reconnecting with nature within urban property development. People are even putting beehives up onto rooftops now. In some areas the bee population, due to the introduction of chemicals in the 30s and 40s, has dropped down to as low as 18%. And in areas in the US where I've been living on and off now for the last 10 years, they are shipping bees from one side of the country to the other in trucks. So, of course, the bees get all the way over to Pennsylvania and they're drunk from jet lagged. How well can they possibly pollinate after that? Because of the pesticides and the lack of the bee population. So it's not just about bringing bees back into urban areas, but it's also about planting plants that are what we call polystemonous plants. So lots and lots of stamens produce lots of pollen. Lots of pollen means you've got lots of opportunity for these bees to continue to spread their joy. So, school kitchen gardens. Another huge movement. We started doing this about 15 years ago, and Stephanie Alexander's done a wonderful job here in Melbourne. There are as many as 2,400 schools have joined up this program now. Planet Ark were very big on this movement. A friend of mine, John D, who I've been involved with now for 25 years in Planet Ark, was very prominent in bringing school kitchen gardens into the school areas. I wrote a book on this several years ago, about 5 years ago, and a lot of people tend to categorize these interesting vegetable patches that might sit in that forgotten about patch in the very back of the garden. When you think about it, there is a plant out there to perform every architectural trick in terms of texture, colour, water-wise, in the horticultural vocabulary. So parsley makes fantastic borders. Artichokes make fantastic accent plants. Peaches, pears, apples, they make fantastic hedges. And so blueberries could make fantastic dividers. So if you think about it, there is an edible plant out there that could perform the ornamental trick that we're chasing to put throughout the landscape. And that's what this book's all about. It really does teach people how to look at plants in a very different way, because if we're smart about it, we could create much more food-producing urban food bowls by swapping out some of our ornamentals for edibles and using them for their architectural attributes and their colour attributes. Changes of level, I think, is one of the most powerful tools in a landscape architect's toolbox, and that is really about creating sunken gardens. You know, the sunken gardens of the 1970s are making their way back into our landscapes now. And so this is a wonderful example of that. Vertical gardens are not just about systems that we attach to walls and grow vertical gardens up the facades. It's also about an intelligent plant selection. And there are plenty of plants out there that will deliver the same techniques. Ficus pumila will actually attach itself to a building and climb and insulate the exterior of the building. Parthenocissus tricuspidata, which we call Boston ivy, will also attach itself to the exterior of the building, and then you get deciduous colour. So it's not just about creating a vertical garden system, it's about creating a building that can withstand what the plants will do to it, and they're tough enough and strong enough to be able to take those tendril climbers. And that's what these images are showing. The image on the top right corner there I took in Atlanta about 5 years ago, and this is a vertical garden that is purely just herbs. And the chef there is picking from a 120-foot vertical garden that is purely just herbs, 10 feet high, and he feeds his patrons every day with this. But it's also about creating this compartmentalization within the landscape where people feel like they're actually in a more intimate space within the garden. There's nothing more boring, I would say, than looking out into a landscape and seeing it all in one go, because it gets very boring. But what creates intrigue is the changes of level, is compartmentalizing that garden and seducing people into different spaces to make them feel like there's some intrigue and there's a reason to go out and delve into the landscape. So I'm constantly changing levels, and I'm constantly breaking up that theory about these wide open spaces being open plan. Vertical gardens are making their ways into the actual buildings, and this is a beautiful building which I'm going to touch on a little more later on, by architect Stefano Boeri. I interviewed him for The Australian about 2 months ago, and in my opinion he is one of the most forward-thinking architects in terms of green building on the planet, and he's got an incredible new seminar, which starts up this year in Matoro at about the end of November for about 5 days. And it's really calling upon the entire industry, architects, designers, botanists, engineers, to come to this summit and dump all of the best ideas and create what is a true living forest in the sky. This is a really interesting bloke that I met a few years ago. Very, very funny bloke. I don't know whether any of you have worked with him. Anyone worked with Patrick Blanc? No. He's done quite a few jobs here in Australia. He did the vertical garden in the Qantas Lounge. He did Central Park, which I was proud enough to go and help him launch. But he's a crazy cat. He was a botanist until the age of 52. And he's got green hair, green fingernails, green shoes, green jeans. And he's like, Jamie, I just got tired of all of this. You know, I just want to... Now I'm not a botanist, I'm an artist. And so what he does is he's come up with this system, which is essentially a biodegradable system. And it's made up of all of this fibre, which is biodegradable. It's kind of like grandma's old carpet underlay that stunk when the cat peed on it, if you know what I mean. Imagine stapling that to the exterior of the building, 6 inches thick, and then when he plants out his plants, he slits the pocket, pops the plant in, and when it's first planted out, you're talking about 90% biodegradable material or soil substitution and 10% plant matter. And within 10 years, the entire table has been switched around. The actual transport system, which is our substitute for soil, has biodegraded down, and the root system, becoming fibrous, becomes the transport system for oxygen, trace elements, nutrients, and water, the 4 things that plants need. And it's a beautiful system because he's able to do cool climate, warm climate, and attach these to the building and really create a living environment. They really are quite spectacular. He told me a really interesting story, and he took me to the location in Paris, and we filmed at this location where he had a 12-story building, and the building next door was adjacent to some of the apartments that were being sold by the developer. Now, it's a bit hard to sell an apartment without a view. So what he did was he leased the opponent's wall, and he greenified the entire 12 stories, and they sold those apartments for a 35% higher yield with garden views because they were looking out onto the opposing green wall. And it was a very sophisticated way to look at what green will add to the bottom line. And it's not just about cause-related marketing where we are perceived to feel like we've got a green building purely for marketing purposes. This was actually something that appealed to the actual purchasers, the people that were coming into the space. Central Park is a huge success. And I think what's so successful about this is the fact that the floor plan has been extended beyond the perimeter of the glazing. And when you stand in these apartments and you look out to the lower story, as most of you would know, one of the biggest issues that councils will have is oversight. What are we looking into? Are we giving the neighbours the privacy and so forth in commercial areas that they deserve? These balcony situations are not necessarily balconies, they're cantilevered gardens. And so the floor just continues on and then continues as greenscape. So everyone, no matter what floor you're on, wakes up with a garden view. And it's a sensational way to think about extending garden onto space. Now that's what it feels like for the person that's sitting inside the building. But then let's take a look at what it looks like from the exterior of the building. And if we started to change up some of those plant habits, and instead of choosing scaevola, which basically comes out and scrambles across the floor, which is a prostrate scrambling shrub, we might look at something that has a spillover habit, like Roselia. And if that spillover habit happens to come down and spill over up to 600 millimetres, stays out of the sight line of the apartment below, now we're painting the building with vertical landscape. But we're using the plant's habit to do so. So it really boils down to not just giving us the soil depth that's required to create that look, but it's also about the plants that we choose to go in that and the habit that plant produces and how we paint buildings by using the natural plant's habit instead of fighting with the elements. This was a true success. I have heard there's a few other little people that have moved into the garden recently, though, in the form of rodents. It's become very, very successful, but they've managed to get rid of most of those now, but that just shows you how successful it was. So this is Bosco Vertical. Now, I've been traveling to Milan for the Milan Furniture Fair for the last 11 years. And releasing our furniture ranges and so forth. And I've been watching this thing being built the entire time, and it's been sensational. This is truly 38 acres of forest in 2 towers on 1 block. It is a true success. There are 750 full-size trees, 5,000 shrubs, and 11,000 perennials existing all in these 2 towers, no higher than 21 stories high. This is a beautiful piece of architecture and landscape working together in complete harmony. This is Stefano Boeri, and Stefano has now moved on to create this seminar that I was talking about in Italy at the end of November, and I'll have details on our website if you like. So the interesting thing about this, and when I interviewed him, I was most intrigued with how on earth are you going to support a 30-foot tree right outside the balcony? So, engineer, how do you deal with that type of weight? Now, from a landscape architect's point of view, we can grow a 50-foot tree out of 850 mil of soil and some drainage material. However, what's interesting is that the weight ratio that pinned back into the floor, when he only added an extra 20 mil on the slab and increased the rebar, the reinforced steel, by 20%, he was able to cantilever out and sustain 30 to 50 foot trees on the perimeter. Now, what happens for the owners inside a house like this, an apartment like this, is it's the house with no curtains. Because suddenly the curtains come off and they've been replaced by this beautiful living green wall, this forest. So everyone looks out through their forest in the sky. They've got complete privacy. Every tree you put into the ground is soaking up 1 ton of carbon emissions in its lifetime. And of course, so you've got not just the carbon footprint of this is beautiful, but you're now looking at a building that truly has vistas that look through trees and no curtains. And therefore, when you take the curtains off the perimeter of the interior of the landscape, suddenly your lounge room just got a whole lot bigger. And so there's that feeling of spaciousness. Now we can take our photographs and pop it into the advertising and sell these apartments with a much bigger vision than what we originally had. So very clever architecture and very, very beautiful sustainability practices. So if you want to get involved, Stefano Boeri, Google him. That summit's happening at the end of November. Here's the slab, some images that I took of the slab being created and the trees being taken up into that landscape. Remember, it's 750 trees. And really, most of the maintenance is done purely this way. Now, we've been doing this for 20, 30 years, cleaning windows. Now we're tending to plants. What a beautiful way to operate a building. This is a system that we developed several years ago, which is a vertical garden blanket. It's made out of recycled plastic bottles. It's got a waterproof membrane on the back. We've got 22 pockets that sit on the front, and then I've got a drip irrigation system that runs through every pocket to make sure that those pockets remain dry. And then we've got little indicators that you can pop into those to monitor the soil's moisture levels, and the irrigation only pops on when it's required. Now, this is a fabulous way of greenifying walls because it's very instantaneous, it's cheap to produce, and if we started to take our landscape up onto urban fences, we can increase our growing area in urban areas by up to 40%. And yes, you can grow tomatoes and carrots and all sorts of things because they are literally 400 millimetres wide by 350 millimetres deep. So it's a fantastic way of increasing the growing space. There's a big movement now, and I was part of this earlier on, the end of last year, with indoor plants. One plant can improve your air quality when it comes to VOCs. One plant can improve your air quality by up to 25%. 5 plants up to 75%. That's in a medium-sized room using medium-sized plants. So this isn't just about aesthetics anymore. This is about well-being. And well-being plugs into your marketing. And marketing plugs into your bottom line. So this really is a green investment. You could call it a growing investment if you like. Terrariums. We've seen plenty of these guys, and I'm going to speed up as much as I can because they're only giving me 20 minutes, but I could talk all day about this. But this is one of my favourite developments in Australia right now, one of the most sustainable, and I'm very proud to be involved. The Bircham in Rosebery is a great example of taking an old building and then bringing new technology into it and creating beautiful green spaces and common areas where community come together. You can see the original concepts that we've created here are really about what I talked about earlier on: compartmentalisation, changing levels, giving people what I call people pockets within the landscape. So you're actually architecturally inviting them to move throughout the space and actually cohabitate in the landscape rather than just looking at it and moving on. What a lot of people don't realise is that it's not just about the way you use it vertically, the way you use it horizontally, it's the way you view it vertically. So when we look down on this landscape, we want to see beauty, we want to see architecture, we want to see inspiration. We actually went out of our way and found some beautiful, very rare white jacaranda trees, which, by the way, are they're not Australian. They're native to Tanzania, but they're still very water-wise, so we love them. Now, this rooftop garden made the front cover of Domain purely because it has, I think, something for everyone on this rooftop. So the developers have been very kind to the residents in creating breakout zones, people pockets in the corners. We created an outdoor cinema there, which was an old rainwater tank, and we converted that into an outdoor cinema. You can see there's two choices of covered areas: lawn, which we're growing on literally 150 millimetres of soil, very well drained and very lightweight. And then beautiful large trees, Tristaniopsis and magnolias that are sitting on the exterior. So it's truly a successful development, and I would urge you to go and take a look at this, not just because of the gardens, but, and there you can see some of what the bird's eye view might give you, but most importantly, the environmental innovation. So here's a list of what it offers: rooftop gardens, energy monitoring and management, electrical vehicle charging in the basement, and I went down and saw them recently, biometric home automation, biometric fingerprint access security, embedded energy network, and solar bulk purchase. So the developer actually purchases the electricity at wholesale and passes on that wholesale price to the residents. So it's a brilliant system, and of course, they have laid solar panels across the roof as well. So water-efficient drip irrigation system, water-wise intelligent plant selection, and weather track monitoring systems to make sure we're not over-watering. Here's what Al Gore says: "The climate crisis offers us the chance to experience what very few generations have had the privilege of knowing: a generational mission. The exhilaration of a compelling moral purpose, a shared and unifying cause. The thrill of being forced by circumstances to put aside the pettiness and the conflict that so often stifle the restless human need for transcendence. This is the opportunity to rise." I was lucky enough to work with Al Gore on his first entry into Australia 12 years ago and became one of his climate change presenters. And back then it was called the Climate Change Project. Now it's called the Climate Reality Project, because it really is a reality. What are the benefits of greening our cities? Greater connection to the natural environment, enhances health and well-being, positive impacts for the greater community, for our planet, and a powerful marketing initiative creating education and awareness for consumers and driving sales through what I call guilt-free purchase. Some of the most successful businesses in today's supermarkets are the ones that are what we call cause-related businesses. If somebody feels like you've got an ethical drive behind the business that is property development, they will fall in love with your brand, and therefore they will be willing to pay whatever it takes to get on board with your positive program that supports the planet, supports community, and supports urban growth. This is a fantastic book, Ecological Design, that I thought I'd throw out there very quickly. How am I going for time there, guys? Okay, we're out. Prefab is a beautiful movement. I'm about to do this very thing myself. I think prefab is definitely something that's very, very big on today's schedule, and I can see that there's economies of scale in so many levels through building prefab areas. I'm putting 11 of these pods onto a very slopey block, and connecting them all by walkways, and then throwing garden at all the negative space. So that means every room is completely surrounded by landscape. It truly does mean you've got a garden view from every level. This is one by Archie Blocks, with a beautiful rooftop garden space. This one, again, putting shutters on the exteriors of the balcony, which is increasing the interior room space. And then biophilic design. So this is a very quick slide on regenerative design. And I think what we really need to start to do is start to look at more sustainable building materials. So here we're looking at a carbon negative material, a hemp brick. I hate to think what happens when this one burns, but anyway. And biomimicry. In nature, we spend zero amount of time stopped in traffic. We spend 70 million hours stopped in traffic in the Netherlands just last year. What happens in a termite mound, and what are we doing in our cities? Why do they get it right, and what can we learn? Here's an incredible fruit, which they studied very, very intensively. This fruit could drop 30 feet and not damage the interior fruit at all, because the exterior of it, its design, thanks to its natural form, actually protected the fruit. So they've actually started to develop aluminium products based on the cellular structure of the exterior of this fruit, purely by what they've learnt from these pomelos. In our business, we use biomimicry all the time. Some of our most successful furniture has been based off a fig tree, and the one on the bottom corner there. The bungalow collection based off bones. People are intrinsically connected to nature, and I think that's where a lot of the success comes from. Our quilting process is based off the hive. Even some of the furniture we've recently done for Natuzzi is based off sand dunes, because people are getting the opportunity now to bring nature inside their homes. Here's some of the walling systems and panels based off raindrops. And you've got beautiful chrysanthemums that turn into walling systems with vacuum-sealed vinyl MDF packs that simply attach to walls and replace gyprock with these ornamental paneling systems. So what's to look for in 2040? We've got to increase solar. In my opinion, we've got to put a rainwater tank into every household in Australia. It should be absolutely no question. And we've got to start building more permeable landscapes. We've been working very closely with quite a few companies developing permeable pavers, where they are seen as as permeable systems, rather than creating additional runoff that comes off the streets, picks up toxins, ends up in our oceans, and of course our riverways, and creating more pollution. We've got to absorb the water on site, and we've got to be more intelligent about the plant and the sealed surface areas that we put into those spaces. Waste reduction is another big one. I'm racing through it, I'm sorry, but I'm running out of time here. And of course, here are some of the design principles. You can take a quick snapshot if you like, but I'm going to have to race on. I'm sorry, guys. I've run out of time, and we've got a quick Q&A after this. Here's some more principles and design criterias. And we'll have these on our website too if you're interested in looking further into it. So, be a pioneer. Courage is always rewarded, if not for the environment, if not for the community, if not to set an example, if not to win awards, then why not just simply do it for your children and the future inhabitants of this planet? We can do it. This is a really interesting new project that we've just started, which is a new TV show that will be harvesting innovative, sustainable ideas from the planet and putting those up onto television and YouTube, so that people can actually learn and share and create what we call a movement. So that is Groundswell, and that is about community and celebrating the accessibility to all of these ideas and innovation, not just in building materials. So watch out for Groundswell. We'll be developing that sometime over the next few months, and if you like to show interest and get involved in that movement, we would certainly welcome you to get involved. Thank you so much. I'm Jamie Jury. Thank you so much for listening to me, and have a wonderful year. Cheers.
Thanks, man. Thank you. So, folks, I think we've got about 5 minutes or so for questions. I'm keen to take anything that comes through the screens, but obviously, if I have any brave takers not called Jeff, up there on the peri-urban fringe. Thank you. Second.
Thank you. My name is Sam, Sam Pert. I'm from Arup in Melbourne, from the ESD team there. Just a quick question. There were some awesome examples of urban greening there, but my question is around how do we take some of these initiatives and integrate them into either social or affordable housing that may not have the means for the maintenance regimes required or the more robust structures that are required to support them?
Yeah, so I think it does boil down to, it starts from the ground up. And so if the work is done at the soil level, it's almost like creating insurance for the plants that we put into the place. I think there should be government subsidies that supports some of the urban greening that we're putting in. And I think we should also think more about a more intelligent plant selection that give you more prostrate growth rather than lateral vertical growth, so that we're covering up more of the landscape for less amount of money. And then maybe looking at, from the very get-go, creating structures that can take on the weight of building or take on the soil that's required to grow what we call green buildings.
Fantastic. Last question of the day to you.
Thank you. I'm Luli from Kingspan. How have you dealt before, like from experience, with vertical gardens affecting other elements of the building? Like I have cases before of plants going through whip holes for brick walls, or fissures getting plants through them and creating a bigger issue, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So if the building is sensitive to that, therefore it's not a poured concrete slab or so forth, or what we call a tilt slab, what will stop plants from growing is no plants will want to break out into open air. So it's called an air pruning effect. So what you can do is create a false wall and create a 40mm void between the external part of the building and where the root system starts to grow. So you create that air void, which is your insurance system. So you're still getting the benefits of cooling the building, but you're stopping any of the damage from the tendril roots that may happen, and that only happens, I guess, when you've got a material that's susceptible to it, but you're stopping any of that damage. So essentially air pruning, creating that 40mm void, which is the minimum that you would require.
Excellent. Was there one last?
But that's a good question.
There we go. Omega.
Can you hear me? Yes. Stefan Preuss, Government Architect's Office. Are you linking your vertical garden systems to grey water systems? Because the issue we have, particularly down in Victoria, is when we need the green wall most, we don't have the water and the water tanks are empty.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I only wish that every council in Australia would approve grey water systems, but unfortunately they don't. And the grey water systems, I think, are another essential tool within urban development. So those vertical gardens systems do plug into rainwater tanks, but it's incredible in this day and age that we're still using potable drinking water to water our gardens. It should be about harvesting stormwater, creating central locations where we can tap into those for irrigation facilities. And if we could place more pressure on government to actually approve grey water systems, as they are in some cases, but I hear up to 85% not approved, then I think we'll have a much more successful resource to be able to tap into, excess runoff and bathwater and laundry and so forth.
Fantastic. What a way to finish with such an energetic final keynote. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Jamie Jury.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Thanks. Cheers.
Well, what a great day and what a great way to finish. The magical yin-yang combination of that energy and Rom and Lucy's mindfulness. And elsewhere, this morning we've had great insights from Living National Treasure Ross. We've sought leadership advice over breakfast with Turi. We've solved BTR with Nick. I'm pretty sure that's totally solved, Ken. We just banked that one as a win almost immediately. Adam and Anna have shown us that smart cities and clean energy are more than just a pipe dream, while they've also artfully interrogated our many expert guests as well as key decision makers. Can you hear me consistently? Yes, you can. Should I use this? Can you hear me up the back? Great, okay. Many expert guests as well as key decision makers such as Lily, Josh, Mark and Angus, and you know, all of you know how I feel about Angus now. And we've been gently schooled by Tim on framing and messaging. We've enjoyed Jorge's call to action and Ken's compelling storytelling about the true impact of our industry on many Australians. And if I ever find the guy who called that propaganda, my goodness, he'll have something to answer for. We've chatted with the green building chiefs and understood the city-shaping transformations that they have presided over. And we've marvelled too at Pascal's urban transformations, while Jackie has helped us grasp the fake nettle of plastic biophilia. It's been an awesome educational roller coaster. At times I felt it might have been too packed and that my brain was going to explode, but actually I've really, really enjoyed it, and I feel entirely embiggened, which is now a formal word thanks to The Simpsons and Merriam-Webster. Please join with me, therefore, in giving our stellar speakers a really big round of applause for a great effort today. And I'm just going to Bruce McAvaney, our sponsors, Lend-Lease, major sponsors, Fraser Property Australia, Landcom, Liberty One Steel, Stockland Wood Solutions, Arup, BlueScope Steel, ProBuild, Kingspan, the CRC for Low Carbon Living, Telstra, GeoAir, South Pole, Green Magazine, Retrofit Australia, Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, AIRAH, Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, Energy Efficiency Council, Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia. And before I ask you to clap, also I'm going to do two pieces of housekeeping, and I know that's generally for despots and zealots to really enforce this, but you could make our lives so easy tomorrow if you remember the following two things. One, the program includes the reconciliation breakfast, if that's on your lanyard obviously, and that there are some concurrent sessions in the morning. And actually the second one is about tonight. The sundown soiree is at Luminaire. It kicks off at 6:30 in South Melbourne, but if you want to get there from here, the buses go at 6 p.m. sharp, so please arrive on time to make sure you hit the festivities. And obviously, any more details that you need about travel arrangements, dress code, etc. are in the conference app. And so that, ladies and gentlemen, is it. In addition to thanking our sponsors, let's finish by acknowledging again the attendance of our future leaders and young Indigenous professionals, which would not have been possible without the help of Landcom. Please thank them all.